Hello, everyone, and also good morning and good evening to our other online participants. Welcome you all to today's webinar on the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. My name is Hong Nong. I am the Executive Director of the Institute for China-America Studies. So as an independent think tank based here in Washington, DC, we have been doing a lot of research on many of the key issues affecting or concerning US-China relations. So today's webinar is part of a series of events of ICAS Trade and Technology Program, which was launched last summer. This program, the aim of this program is to provide timely analysis of many of the trade and technology affairs relating to China and America, and also to expand the public dialogue on this very critical topic. So let me just say a few words about today's event. The proposed Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is considered as Biden administration's answers to the question on the US commitment to the Indo-Pacific region. So I think there are not too many information made public except for the 4-pillar work. So then we think later this month, the administration is going to unveil the Pacific Economic Framework. So we think it's the right time to organize this event and also bring experts to discuss questions such as what would be the reaction for many of the Indo-Pacific regional countries, what would be the perception, and whether this economic framework will serve the purpose of setting the regional rules for economic activities, or will this IPFs quietly means to be counter China or de-emphasize China's roles in these existing Asian and also Trans-Pacific supply chains. So my own observation is I hear different message. So I think for many of the countries in the Pacific, the message they receive is probably that the US want to build or set up a framework which will integrate economic share with a shared economic interest. But I think here in domestic stakeholder, the message here is the US intends to build a mechanism to better counter or better compete with China. This is the message I got. So hence, we probably will be some concerning voices from some regional states. They probably will be not very enthused about the future because they want to have a good economic relationship with both China and the United States. So we're really looking forward to discussion on these questions, among others. So let me introduce this panel. We're going to be moderated by my colleague, Mr. Saurabh Gupta. He's a senior fellow with ICAS, and he's also the head of ICAS Trade and Technology Program, which I introduced earlier. And we are also delighted to host 4 distinguished speakers. You're going to have their full bios on our website. Let me quickly introduce them. So joining us today in ICAS office, we have Mr. Greg Allen. He is the president of the US-China Business Council. And prior to joining the council, Mr. Allen has a long distinguished career in the US public service, beginning in 1985 at the Department of Commerce International Trade Administration. And then we have Dr. Satu. He's the Vice President of East-West Center, the headquarters based in Hawaii, and he's also the head of the East-West Center in Washington, where he created and also currently directs the Asian Matter for America initiative. So welcome. And also joining us from virtually, we have Dr. Mary Lovely. She's a senior fellow with Peterson Institute for International Economies, and she's also an emeritus professor at Syracuse University. Last but not the least, we have Denis, Dr. Denis Simon. He's the professor of China Business and Technology and senior advisor to the president of China Affairs at Duke University. Dr. Simon is also a senior advisor to ICAS Trade and Technology Program. So without further ado, let me give the floor to Sarah, please.
Thank you, Nam. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to the panelists for taking up this, for speaking to us and on this very important topic. The administration's emphasis, of course, is on Europe and Ukraine, and it has been for a while, but the administration is going out of its way to show also its emphasis on Asia. We had the US-ASEAN summit just last week. President Biden is going to be in East Asia. And I assume next month, the defense secretary will probably be going to the Shangri-La dialogue. I'm not sure if that's the case, but it's the first time it's going to be happening in person in 2 or 3 years. So the administration is really gearing up for its Indo-Pacific strategy. I think Mr. Secretary of State Blinken was supposed to give a China speech too, but that got pushed back a little bit. So it's at this point of time, it's interesting to focus on one of their key deliverables coming out of the administration, which is the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. It is framed within the context of the US's Indo-Pacific strategy. But yes, there is not that much detail available at this point of time. And you know, the administration has talked about it as being an administrative arrangement, which means it won't be ratified by Congress. It does not have new market access commitments, which is not how US previous trade agreements were. It talks of a consultative enforcement mechanism at a time when the US always used to demand a kind of a third-party dispute settlement mechanism. And so the question we are trying to grapple with, is this a new model of US trade liberalization, considering that that it's hard to get trade agreements passed in Congress, and considering that tariff barriers are already very low, and the focus should be on behind the border barriers? Or is it just the administration talking a good game because it doesn't have the political capital to do better? And worse, is the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework geared to actually attempting to not so much a liberalizing endeavor as much as meant to decouple supply chains, US and Asian supply chains from China? Those are some of the topics we'll be talking about today. We're not going to discuss the details per se of the framework, but the discussion is going to be geared around the Indo-Pacific Framework as part of the US's Indo-Pacific strategy, how it impacts US-China relations, how it impacts US-Asia relations, economic relations, and what are the Asians saying about it, thinking about it, and what are the expectations going forward? We have a great panel out here. My request is to the panelists to keep the initial remarks to about 10 to 12 minutes. And then thereafter, we'll go into a discussion phase and we will take question and answers. Without any further ado, Craig, the floor is yours.
Well, terrific. Firstly, let me thank Nung and Rob and ICAS for bringing us together. And what an honor it is to be here with Mary, Satu, and Denis. Very grateful for this opportunity. So I think that you framed it correctly. IPEF is just a part of the Indo-Pacific strategy, but I think that there's a danger that this economic element of the overall Indo-Pacific strategy might be the weakest link within the whole strategic approach. I think you hinted at this, but let's be explicit. There's a lot that we don't know about this. It has not been publicly released, and it's been described, but that description has moved over time. And the talking points of the administration have changed quite a bit. So a week from today, we should probably know more. But at the current time, I believe that we have 4 pillars: fair and resilient trade, supply chain resilience, infrastructure, and tax or anti-corruption. But I think that it's accurate to say that within those 4 pillars, there are many sub projects, and each of those would have an owner within the US bureaucracy, probably. But the details are important, and we don't have those details yet. One of the most important details is who's eligible for this, who's in, who's out, and what are the conditions for eligibility. And that is something that we can all watch with great interest. So while there's, because there's so much uncertainty, I'd like to be modest in my comments, but I'd like to make 5 observations. Firstly, I think that the administration is really correct to try to be more fulsomely, sustainably, and proactively engaged with Asia. That is a good thing. And we want to maximize the benefits of to the US people of the economic growth that Asia is going to bring. The United States is a Pacific country. And indeed, we belong to the region, and virtually all of the countries in the Asia Pacific look forward to our more proactive leadership. We have to also be, I think, just humble and recognize the damage done when we left TPP so abruptly. That was a geopolitical blunder, and it's going to be hard to recover from that. So maybe this is an attempt to do that. I wish the administration well in this endeavor. The second thing is that IPAF is not CPTPP. It's a very different approach. And I would argue one that is very much outside of traditional or normal American trade diplomacy and protocols. And just kind of to underscore that, I've seen no reference to the WTO. And indeed, because I don't see reference to our commitments under the WTO, I'm curious about whether or not this is WTO compliant. And indeed, I have no doubt that others will raise that issue if it is not WTO compliant. But I hope that it is consistent with our multilateral obligations through and through. So it's not really a trade agreement. It is an economic agreement. And indeed, the economic component of the Indo-Pacific strategy. But as it offers no market access commitments or improvements by the US to the members, I'm not so sure how popular this will be in the Asia-Pacific region. What will be the uptake of this is something that I'll be watching very closely. And given the withdrawal from TPP, maybe our interlocutors in the region will think, well, no market access, maybe that's a good thing because it's more sustainable, possibly. But at the same time, with no market access commitments, it's less attractive, even if it is more durable. So the third thing my third observation would be that while IPAF is not directly targeted or associated with China, it should be underscored that China is the largest trading partner of every potential IPAF member. China is not sitting still. The successful conclusion of the RCEP, and indeed China's application to join the CPTPP, has done a lot to improve regional integration within the Asia-Pacific region. And while the views of China in Washington and within the Beltway are pretty skeptical and pretty jaded, that's not necessarily true in the region. And I think that a lot of countries are, don't ask them to make a choice. They're going to be working within both. And China's RCEP, and if China joins CPTPP, that is real regional economic integration. That my assumption would be is a very good thing for Asia. I wonder if IPEF will do the same, will contribute to regional economic integration. I would argue that successful implementation of RCEP and particularly if China joins CPTPP, it puts American companies in a bind. Will we have to invest in Asia to get behind the tariff walls? Or can American farmers, workers, and ranchers benefit from exporting to Asia from behind higher tariff walls than is faced within that economic grouping? I hope that we are not forced to invest abroad. Fourth, while the administration can be faulted, in my view, for not offering more reciprocal market access, at least it's very consistent. Last week, we saw the, I think, very successful completion of the US-EU Trade and Technology Council, which produced quite a detailed list of deliverables. And I think it's interesting to compare the potential TTC program with the potential IPEF program. And I think what I see from both of these is really a focus on trade defense measures. That would be export controls, import screening, secure supply chain, and other defensive measures. Now, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Defense is good. But defense without a balanced offensive approach is not particularly a good way to win the game. It's not as attractive as it could or it should be. American companies want the US government to facilitate greater market access in Asia. Will this agreement do that? Will the agreement lead to more free and fair trade for American companies? Will this benefit American companies? I don't know. And finally, let me note or remind folks that the US will be hosting APEC in 2023. How does this fit into the framework that has been active within the APEC context since the Clinton administration? What I would note is that IPEF might be an awkward fit within APEC. It's never, India, this is an Indo-Pacific framework, so India is going to play some role, but India is not a member of APEC, and I'm not sure how to square that circle. So many of the countries that are going to be potential members of IPEF are committed to the Bogor goals and the objectives of the free trade area of the Asia Pacific, or FTAP. Is the Biden administration dedicated to those same goals? And how will IPEF fit within that framework, I think is an interesting question to ask. So in conclusion, just two quick remarks. We wish the administration every success in the upcoming negotiation. And it'll be very interesting to see what the uptake is and how this will impact the overall economic architecture of the Asia Pacific or the Indo-Pacific, as you might prefer. The second is that I very much doubt that the IPEF will have a great impact on US-China relations or US-China trade. Most American companies are in China for China. China will remain a large and important market there. China will remain a huge partner of the United States. And while I hope IPEF will improve our relationships with the periphery, I doubt that it's going to have a huge impact on our trade relationship with China. So we wish IPEF every success. We're delighted that the Biden administration is focused on our friends in Asia, and we hope that this endeavor will benefit those friends as well as American farmers, workers, and ranchers. I will conclude.
Thanks, Greg. That was really helpful. More questions than answers. And I think you've laid out a good, useful bottom line. Does it advance Asia-Pacific economic integration or does it not? And I think we will see what the answer to that is. Thanks. Could I turn to you now, Professor Lovely, for your comments?
Certainly, yes. First, thanks to ICAS and to Executive Director Hong for inviting me to be on this eminent panel. It's really a pleasure to be here. As usual, Craig started us off with a very broad and inclusive overview of the issues. And I will try to just highlight some of them in my short remarks. I think there is a useful parallel to be drawn between the Trade and Technology Council, as Craig just did, and the IPEF. I think we're seeing the US move to coordinate, not negotiate. And given that coordination has been in short supply over the last administration, I think that this is welcome by many countries. However, we have to realize that it is a very limited approach. It's one that can certainly bear fruit in certain areas, perhaps in digital trade, in some increasing coordination on standardization, and some of the other types of issues that are raised in the working groups of the TTC. They would also be welcome discussions in Asia. So I think that that is welcome. I don't want to minimize it, but we have to recognize that it does have limits, that approach. If we compare what is on offer on the IPEF, and I have to echo Craig here and say, we don't know the full details. Unfortunately, Secretary Blinken's speech had to be postponed due to his illness. So we're waiting for more details. But if we compare what we think might be on offer to the RCEP or to CPTPP, we see that these are very different animals. Even RCEP, which the United States long kind of denigrated as not a deep or high standard agreement, goes further. And in particular, I think two of the main functions of RCEP will be its ability to deepen the Asian Pacific production networks. We have to know US is not party to that, and also serve as a coordinating platform for future issues. So I think RCEP is a significant framework within the region. We also have to recognize that 8 of the potential IPEF members are already bound together by the CPTPP. None of the IPEF structures will be embedded into these existing structures. And so we really don't know how they will function vis-a-vis these treaties. Again, this is not going to be something that will be codified in US law. The executive branch has no intention to bring it to the legislative branch. So we really don't know how enduring these changes will be. Having said, brought up the issue of it perhaps not being enduring, I think it's one of the main problems for nations in the region when approaching these negotiations with the US or coordination with the US. The region has already been whipsawed by rapid changes in US policy. Craig already mentioned our rapid withdrawal from TPP. Those are things which clearly are on the minds of our allies in the region. We see increasing policy uncertainty in the US. They're well aware of US political polarization. And when we talk to people in the region, you hear about the US-China obsession. So many things are seen through the lens of US competition with China. And it's clearly in the IPEF, or at least the economic part of the economic framework that we have so far had available to us. This will be owned by separate bureaucracies within the government, which suggests that there won't be a lot of trading off of one type of concession or benefit for our allies against another. So no give for a take. We see that this kind of conflict is already very real. We've had in the paper just yesterday, Secretary Yellen speaking out about perhaps reducing the China tariffs for inflation fighting, and that quickly being matched by a statement by US Trade Representative Tai that that's not going to happen. So we see continuing, in some sense, disagreement and even disarray in terms of what the Asia strategy is. So my last comments will be about that China obsession. I think that many in the region welcome a deeper security alliance with the United States. That's certainly a benefit for them of this, U.S. approach to them. But they clearly don't want to choose sides. They seek, I think, a real partnership with the U.S. on trade, on infrastructure, on digital interoperability, a whole host of important issues on economic sphere. But none of those, or we're not really sure how much of those are actually on offer. Very small sums of money. It's not clear what digital interoperability will mean when the US is clearly heading on a path of building China out. And China is a fundamental partner to these countries in technology, trade, and production. So what does it mean to have a real partnership on these issues? We keep hearing it's not a trade agreement. Then what kind of an agreement is it? I think it would be wrong to label it a trade agreement. Trade is really a secondary concern here. We might think of it in different terms as some type of policy coordination. I think these countries are also concerned about the US, what the US is going to ask in return. To some extent, the US sees its role as one that the region should welcome. Many of these countries are seeing increasing Chinese aggression. We've seen Lithuania, Australia, and we welcome some diversification. But are they interested in decoupling? I think the answer is a resounding no, they are not. What is the US going to ask? The US seems to be moving forward with bifurcation in ways that are deeply unproductive, in my view. For example, we know that US objections over the Chinese insistence on being eligible for the TRIPS waiver on COVID vaccines, even though China has asserted repeatedly that will not make use of that, even that has been unacceptable to the United States, which says the United States is not going to go very far in terms of changing its approach. We are moving toward a bifurcated 6G world. China is very serious about 6G, and it will clearly have to be developed in coordination with the rest of Asia. How is that going to work with the US insistence that China not be in its 6G? Is this realistic? Will it change these countries' relationships with China? Craig thought, no, it won't change. And our relationship with China will endure because of its magnitude and importance, economic importance. So asking them to bifurcate may actually have a negative effect in terms of alienating some of these countries from the United States. So I think we have to be worried. Just ending up, if we look at our key partners in the region, they are deeply, deeply integrated with China. Just to quote one statistic of many, 64% of Chinese exports to Japan come from foreign invested enterprises operating in China. Many of these are Japanese affiliates. We could have almost the identical statistics for South Korea. Many of them are in electronics. So I think that the US has so far not really been very realistic, or in fact, even very descriptive about what its aims are in the region. So in closing, let me say that I share with Craig the pleasure in seeing the US engaging with the region. It does seem to have many positive aspects of cooperation and coordination that we certainly welcome, but we see this push in the IPEF to put India in some chapters and ASEAN in other chapters at the center of the Indo-Pacific as deeply problematic, since part of its important goal is to build China out. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Lovely, insightful comments. And again, interesting point you raised was, IPEF is not embedded in any of the existing trade agreements in the region. And for example, and US is going to be next year's APEC chair. This year's APEC chair, Thailand says that it wants to build out towards FTAP. So when the US comes next, where does FTAP and where does IPEF stand with each other, and what's the way forward? Lots of questions, but thank you for the presentation. Satu, can I turn to you now for your comments?
Well, thank you, and I'm delighted to join this very august panel. I've read many of your works and I follow all of the things you do. So really delighted to be on the panel. Let me thank the Institute of China-American Studies in Nong Hong, and of course, Saurabh as well. I've listened to these comments and spoke to Saurabh before, and Craig and Mary have done such a wonderful job of framing some key issues. I'm going to sort of go lightly on things that Saurabh asked me to do, which was on Southeast Asia in particular. And sort of the two big question is where this fits in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, Indo-Pacific strategy, and sort of the new model issue, which of course Mary and Craig have addressed a bit too. So let me say the following on this whole issue of IPEF within the strategy. We don't actually have an IPEF, as both have pointed out. Second, it wasn't mentioned in the joint vision statement at the US-ASEAN Special Summit. Now, that doesn't mean it didn't come up, because there were numerous bilaterals and other meetings where IPEF details were discussed in great length, as I understand, between the governments of the two. The second point I want to make on that is we've talked a lot about Indo-Pacific strategy and where IPEF fits. And the fact that it's being launched on a presidential visit in Japan, we understand from Secretary of Commerce's public comments, leads me to believe that this is a very alliance-based approach. That is to say, it really privileges the ability of key partners and allies to join this agreement. And we've heard a mix of views from the region, particularly Southeast Asia. I mean, Japan has spoken favorably, Singapore has, Korea has, and we'll wait to see about others. So there's been a mix of views. Vietnam has been less interested, and I'll get to that a little bit later. The second point I want to make is that to me, IPEF represents, we talk a lot in Washington about consensus about Indo-Pacific strategy. And I would say on the defense, security, diplomatic front, there is a lot of consensus. I would simply point out that on the economic, commercial, trade, and investment front, there's less consensus about that strategy. And to me, IPEF is a representation of that lack of consensus about where we were in TPP. And I couldn't agree more with Craig that I believe it was a blunder for the United States, for our country not to be in TPP. And I'm very pleased that CPTPP members are keeping that alive and keeping that as a platform that, you know, under different circumstances could be there. The related point about the lack of consensus on commerce, trade, and investment is obviously that this is in the context of domestic politics, both upcoming November 20 midterm elections, but also 2024. And you can see even in results overnight in Pennsylvania and last week in Ohio, that economic issues are resounding. And I would just flag that the Indo-Pacific strategy says specifically reference to Indo-Pacific economic prosperity and its implications for the United States, quote, for everyday Americans. So that look in the current political context is important. And Mary has flagged what's been apparent for weeks on the inflation issue about tariff reductions vis-a-vis China. Is this an inflationary tool or not? Right? Whether we should remove the tariffs. So this is all part of, in my view, the contest or the lack of consensus about the economic elements of Indo-Pacific strategy. The fourth point I want to make is about a lot of talk in the region here, of course, about the end state being FTAP and integration. My own assessment as a non-trade economist is I'm not convinced that the end state that we seek in 2022 and forward is what we sought in 2012 or 2014 or 2010. In other words, the whole integration project would have been a culmination of the whole globalization project of the post-90 period. And I'm not at all convinced that American policymakers or the American domestic political context sees that as the desired end state today. I may be wrong, but I think there's a much more of a contest about that end state. The reason that point is important to me in considering IPEF is IPEF is as I said, a signal of the lack of consensus, a signal of the domestic political context, and a signal of the limits of the ultimate integration project. And in that context, I frame it this way, that US strategy on economics, has always been so on security, has moved from sort of hubs and spokes to a web-based model in the 90s to what I would call now wires. And wires denote, to my mind, an alignment of like-minded partners on key issues. And therefore, a certain a la carteism is inherent in such an approach to strategy. And I think IPEF has elements of that, which I'll get to. It also doesn't include India. And that's a big question because India is not in APEC. It's not in RCEP. It's not in CPTPP. And if one of the key elements of Indo-Pacific strategy is to build in India, IPEF is not likely to be the way to do it. So let me turn to the question of model. Very briefly, I'm not sure it's a new model because I don't know what it is yet. So your question is pertinent, but I don't know the answer. We have no document, we don't see. We have hints of different elements, 4 pillars, 6 pillars, what's under trade facilitation, what's under digital, I'm not sure. Does it have privacy or does it have localization contact rules? I don't know. And there are other elements of it like infrastructure, digital supply chains that again, until we see the details and what the incentive structure is, we will go on. I want to make one point that I'm still struggling with. And that's Mary's point, and others, of course, have made this point, that it's not a traditional trade agreement. And that is certainly true. Then it begs the question, it's obviously more complicated if you're docking onto different elements of this, and it will involve different bureaucracies. And I'm not settled in my mind whether that's a negative or a plus. On the downside, it's going to be very difficult to cut deals with multiple bureaucracies in multiple countries on different pillars at the same time without legal and international kind of frameworks. On the other hand, I think to myself, if you're moving from a hubs and spokes and a web to a more wired relationship, then maybe you want to engage with these bureaucracies. And maybe you want to have new ties with digital bureaucracies or telecoms ministries in the region that you didn't have and would have been vectored through the trade ministries in those regions. So I could see some positives. Let me turn closing. It's just a couple of comments about Southeast Asia, at least as a non-Southeast Asian, how I perceive their view. First, very high demand signal for the United States. Lest we forget, I think someone was telling me this morning, 6 of America's top 30 trade partners are in Southeast Asia. Vietnam is now number 10. So before we write off the US role in the region, let's remember, we are the largest investor. We are a huge trade partner. We're a huge partner in other ways, technology, education, and I would urge you to look at ASEAN Matters for America, America Matters for ASEAN, for the kind of graphic and data displays on how we interact both at the national and state level. Second takeaway about Southeast Asia is Southeast Asia welcomes China's role, but it also welcomes the EU role, Japan's role, ROK role, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. It has a polygamous commercial appetite, and it is perfectly sound in wanting that because it gains benefits from all. The third point I'd make about Southeast Asia is there seems to be a very strong consensus within Southeast Asia that they want an open and inclusive agreement for all 10 countries. Fair enough, but the problem is ASEAN itself is not unified on what it is capable of doing and what it wants. So it's asking the US to provide a one-size-fits-all, which is inherently impossible if the 10 countries are so different and their own motivations, desires, and end states and capabilities are different. And so I think my takeaway is that Southeast Asia is absorbing what they've heard. They are going to seek a number of bilateral deals, including the US-Malaysia semiconductor deal, for example, and other elements. But until we know what is announced in Japan, apparently, and what those details mean for each of those ministries. I'll just close on one point, which kind of gets is a political economy point, but I think there are no really strong governments in Southeast Asia currently. Philippines just had an election. There's been transitions in other governments. There's an upcoming election in Indonesia. So we face a time when IPEF will go forward just before the July summits and the November summits, at a time when Southeast Asian ability to form consensus across multiple bureaucracies and civil societies within their own countries will also implicate the ability to move forward on IPEF, whatever constraints IPEF itself has. So let me end there and thank you again for the opportunity.
Thanks, Satu. I mean, terrific comments. I love that comment you about the integration project. I mean, we have to be just aware that it's not the way it was 10 years back, and IPEF being representative of that dilemma today. And also the point you talked about in terms of bureaucracies engaging each other, because we saw this with the EU and Japan when they had the TTIP. There are trade-facing bureaucracies and there are non-trade-facing bureaucracies, and they are very jealous of the prerogatives, the non-trade-facing ones, and really nothing got done per se. And therefore, in the context of IPEF, even if it does move forward, the non-trade-facing bureaucracies here and in Southeast Asia or wherever, will they be able to have anything like a reasonable conversation? Thank you very much. Denis, can I turn to you now for your comments? Thanks.
Sure. Thanks very much. And thanks to the Institute for inviting me and hosting this very timely conference. I'm always impressed by the fact that you guys seem to be able to select really timely topics and to really find good people to come on board. So again, thanks for including me. We've obviously heard a lot of insightful comments from the previous three speakers, and to be honest, I'm a bit humbled by the fact that they haven't left anything really important outside of their comments. And so my job, I guess, as the cleanup hitter is to find a few areas where I can add some value and make some informed commentary. More generally, I like the idea of the focus of Mary and also of Craig on the idea of interface points. I like that because there are lots of initiatives going on in the region simultaneously, and I think that we really do need to spend much more time looking at how all of these initiatives might or might not interface with one another. And I think if we could stand back for a moment and look at the way these pieces get configured with one another, it would tell us a lot about the potential for which ones are really going to be highly impactful and which ones are going to be difficult to make anything of. But going forward, I'd like to actually take a little bit more of a provocative role here. And what I'd like to do is take a look at IPEF as if I was sitting in Beijing right now. We constantly are hearing that IPEF is not an anti-China initiative and that it's much more oriented towards enhancing the U.S. position in the Asia-Pacific region. But frankly speaking, given the rise of Asia, the pressing need for the U.S. to have a broader, deeper engagement, IPEF, as Craig has said, is a good idea. But if I was sitting in Zhongnanhai right now in Beijing as President Xi and the members of the standing committee have been over the last many months, and not even taking into account the previous Trump administration policies, I would be rather uncomfortable. And my discomfort really would come more from the intentions that are being shown by Washington, D.C. and the Biden administration than the actual likely impact that IPEF may have. And we've heard a lot about the frailties, shortcomings, disconnects in IPEF, and I'm going to get back to that in a minute, but that's something that we have to keep in mind. everyone has confirmed, so far the existing skepticism that exists in and around the IPEF initiative. Again, we need something, but is this it? Many, many questions. But it's hard for me, if I was sitting in Beijing, to take IPEF out of the context of things like the Senate's Innovation and Competition Act and its counterpart in the House, and plus all of the rather broad range of anti-China initiatives regarding investment, export controls, technology transfer, semiconductor policy that keep creeping into the mainstream of public policy in the United States. Many experts have said that Biden's IPEF strategy is no more than a thinly veiled effort to counter China in the Asia-Pacific region. And I think there's some substance to that. Also, IPEF does not look so innocuous or innocent when one takes it as part of this larger toolkit that the Biden administration seems to want to be throwing at China and how China is going to respond to it in terms of its own economic and technological advance. If I were in Beijing, basically, I would see all these things taken together as a kind of stranglehold in terms of access to advanced know-how, technology, markets, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, to carry to its logical conclusion, if there is such a thing with IPEF at the moment, the IPEF is not just designed to highlight the US economic commitment to the region, which is very important, as everyone agrees, but to shape the trajectory of the region in ways that specifically reduce Chinese influence. And I think this is something we need to be clear about because we can't do this halfway. In other words, if this is the strategy and this is the goal, then let's do it. But I raised the question about whether this should in fact be the strategy. Sitting in Beijing, my paranoia about US intentions will only be fed further by the increased participation of countries and economies across the region. And the tighter IPEF becomes, the more paranoid I would get if I was sitting in Beijing. Now, I could imagine being an advisor, let's say, to Xi Jinping, and making the argument to him, Mr. Xi, IPEF is nothing to worry about. The incentives for gaining real momentum are lacking. The initiative lacks high-level leadership and support in Washington, D.C., especially in the Congress, and the overall ties that are being sought are not sustainable, given the dynamic nature of the economic and the technological situation in the region. In other words, President Xi, you have nothing to worry about because it's not very likely that IPEF is going to get the kind of traction that will make a big difference to you. In fact, that actually may turn out to be the case. And in fact, the Chinese government doesn't have much to worry about. But on the other hand, there are many ways IPEF could in fact be highly disruptive to China. First, in terms of supply chain resilience, which is one of the four pillars, it's very clear that the US government would like to see American companies become less dependent and less embedded within the Chinese economy, working with Chinese suppliers and producers. And this is not a small matter. The issue of making these transitions to other suppliers and producers in the region is something that we need to take pause about. And particularly for the fact that when we recognize those of us who've been in the China game for 3 or 4 decades realize it's taken a long, long time to develop these relationships. And they finally have been working, fairly well over the last 10, 15 years. And US companies are not about just to toss them asunder because of, perhaps a hiccup at the moment of time. And so the switching costs are very, very high. And they're very high, not only to China, but also they're going to be very costly to the American companies. So I think this is something that Beijing is very, very concerned about. The second is that one of the elements that's part of this is the so-called digital economy and how to deal with the evolution of the digital economy. Mary mentioned 6G. I think this is very, very important. The RCEP will help Beijing maintain its stance on so-called digital sovereignty because it doesn't have any enforcement mechanisms that will force countries to go in a certain direction. I think that that's very, very important, and Beijing clearly wants to see that stay in place. And if there were a competing regime that was moving in a totally different direction, Beijing might find that very, very upsetting. And third, all this talk about inclusivity, who's a member, who's not a member, I think the fact is that the stark reality of all this is that China is not a member. It's not about to be asked to become a member, and it's not going to be invited. And, one has to ask up front, if you're talking about multilateralism and talking about, integrated trade regimes, how can the exclusion of China help to place the global and regional trading system on a more stable, integrated path? As Craig noted, China, of course, is not simply sitting by and watching all of this without taking its own actions. First, it continues to pursue the Belt and Road Initiative. And while the BRI may feel some pain because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the Chinese decision to not push against the Russians in the ways that Western countries are, I think the Belt and Road Initiative is still alive and well. And it's no longer just about infrastructure and building buildings, but it's also about education and science and technology. And President Xi Jinping at the last big Belt and Road Conference made a major commitment publicly to clean up China with respect to the corruption, environmental problems, debt diplomacy that have been plaguing some of the projects associated with the BRI. So BRI is still very much alive and well, and a factor that China is going to continue to push forward. Second, as we heard from Mary, China is continuing to play its own role in regimes like RCEP, and we have to realize just how important that is. The Biden administration has offered $150 million to support IPEF. Last year, China offered ASEAN $1.5 billion to support development initiatives. The RCEP covers 2.2 billion people, 28% of global trade, 30% of global GDP, with 15 members. India and the United States are not members. 50% of all of the exports of the RCEP countries go to one another, and China has become the #1 trade partner. So this thing is coming together in a way that I think the United States could only hope in terms of IPEF. And I think that we need to be careful that we don't ignore the activity that's building up there. And finally, in terms of China's actions, of course, Xi Jinping has made technological self-reliance for China his new mantra, beyond even indigenous innovation. And he's been responding to both the push and the pull, imperatives, but he's made a major commitment. And basically, China doesn't have any choice given the direction of US policy, including things like IPEF. And so we just heard a report the other day that more and more officials in China with STEM backgrounds are being appointed to leadership roles at the provincial and municipal level, as well as within the central committee, in order to ensure the kind of talent needed to push this technological self-reliance agenda forward goes ahead. And if you look at the fact that there are 65 plus countries that China is interacting with in the BRI, China might be able to help set technical standards in a way, as Mary suggested, we start to see this bifurcated global economy begin to actually have some substantive meaning. So I would say, and I would suggest that China is going to continue to assert itself as a center of gravity in economic and technological realms in the region. And this is something that I don't think that we can do much to halt. But most of the countries in the region, I think, as indicated by our three speakers, would like to walk on two legs. They don't want this to become a zero-sum game. But they recognize that Chinese and American policies on a number of issues are diametrically opposed to one another. And that's why this question of interface points becomes so important for how things are going to fit together. Now, just in closing, Kurt Campbell, President Biden's Indo-Pacific guru, he's also the same individual that helped draw up the so-called Asia pivot during the Biden administration, has said that a conflict with China is not inexorable. I agree with his notion that we can both compete and cooperate with China. But I hope he can explain to me and others how IPEF minus China helps to bring China into the community of nations in a positive way. If I was sitting in Beijing, I would not like what I'm seeing. Even if IPEF has multiple shortcomings, I would see these actions in a much more disturbing fashion, leading to consequences that would eventually make it more and more difficult to draw China into the international community. Do we really think it is beneficial in terms of US national interests to marginalize China to such an extent that it doesn't play by any of the rules at all? I think that we are in a very dangerous, precarious area, and I think that we need to think a little bit more.
Thank you for bringing in the perspective from the Chinese end as to how they might react to this situation, and that's also a useful segue. I think we are going to go to Q&A right now, but before we go to Q&A, I just wanted to ask one question to Craig and to Mary. It's about the elephant in the room, which is China, and the specific question is, administration has not had any China trade strategy per se. I mean, it's talking about tariffs, but I mean, in terms of bilateral engagement. And do you think that is querying the pitch in terms of this IPEF conversation? And secondly, what would you recommend be a China bilateral trade strategy on the part of the administration?
Okay, so I think that what the administration has said vis-a-vis Asia Pacific is that they're trying to kind of shape the environment with allies, friends, and partners in a manner that would encourage China to take policies that are more in line with global convergence. So they're trying to shape the environment around China. And that was what the meetings with the ASEAN leaders were about. That was what the TTC was about. And that is what the IPEF is about. At least in my view, China is so large and so important that the lack of dialogue that we are facing right now is really deleterious, and is leading to isolation of actually both the United States and China. And at least from a corporate perspective, we have a lot of market access issues in China that are just simply not being dealt with.
As Craig mentioned, the U.S. is trying to shape the environment around China, but it's doing it in a way that is indicative of U.S. domestic politics and the difficulty of getting a clear strategy that would allow the U.S. to actually lead. For example, if you want to tie China deeply into global rules, why wouldn't the U.S. be leading the charge for reform at the WTO? We see the EU actually bringing cases. It's brought a case recently about China's policies toward IP. And it seems to be now carrying the torch by itself. We know already that the US, in a sense, is stalemate a dispute settlement. We could go on in terms of other ways the US could lead. So it seems that his strategy now is trying to kind of circle the wagons, as Denis so cogently argued, and it's very unclear how that really contributes to bringing China into the fold. So I share the concerns that Craig and Denis have raised.
Can I just add a quick comment here?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I think the point that Craig made is something that we shouldn't lose sight of, and that is that the level of engagement in terms of dialogue and just basic conversation has become so limited. State Department people won't take phone calls from embassy people. The level of engagement on specific, platform type issues is so minimal that the Chinese embassy people, at least my understanding is, that they're feeling totally frustrated that even to have a dialogue, a basic conversation is just something that takes months now to organize. We need to understand, where this is all headed, because what's happening is that we may be driving off a cliff and we're getting closer and closer to the edge. And we won't realize it until it's too late. I think that it's important for us to stop and take pause here.
Part of this is an expectation gap. IPEF doesn't reach what TPP would have reached. So there's a natural dissatisfaction, because one thing Southeast Asia is clearly trying to do is they see our military, diplomatic, political engagement. They want to see even more sustainable economic engagement for the reasons I outlined, which is they want to have multiple options and multiple partners around the world. And that includes, of course, China, but not only China.
Interesting. Can I drop a little hot potato on your lap, Craig? Satu talked about the private sector and private sector engagement, and Southeast Asians looking at it. Do you feel that this administration's emphasis on worker-centered policy has not led to adequate engagement of private sector and private business in formulation?
Yeah, I think to Riley's question, which is a great question, I would have to go to the basic assumption here that trade is off the table or should be off the table. I think that is a very poor starting point. Americans benefit from imports. Every American family benefits from imports. And having a trade policy that is 95% defense and 5% offense just is not going to win the game when the rest of the world has balanced offense and defense.
We are running out of time out here. I wanted to ask one specific audience questions to Satu. And this was specifically because it relates to it'll be our last question, unfortunately. It relates to last week's ASEAN summit, US-ASEAN summit. And the essential question was where does Indo-Pacific Economic Framework sit in context of that summit, which was held last week? And also, to what extent does IPEF influence the dynamics in terms of integration in Southeast Asia? And just what are your takeaways from the summit last week?
Yeah, look, my takeaways are really quite simplistic. Number one, great persistence was shown on both sides for getting a summit scheduled, despite a major war in Europe caused by Russia, and postponements and schedule changes a couple of times. So it happened. It happened with the absence of one leader, Myanmar, and a substitute for the head of government of the Philippines, obviously because of also a recent election there. So that was great. The second big takeaway is that it was hopefully the start of a series of senior U.S. officials showing up in the region, both in the summer in July in Cambodia, but also in November at the key summits. So everyone will be watching. Third, as I mentioned at the outset, IPEF was not specifically mentioned in the statement, but IPEF was one of the elephants in the room. There were many elephants in the room, but certainly IPEF was one, and it was discussed at a bilateral level and through various other meetings, even if it didn't make it into the actual formal statement. And finally, I'd just say this story is not written, just as the TPP story was not written. The CPTPP story is still running. There's still an ongoing narrative about it. I think the IPEF narrative is just starting because we're going to get an announcement allegedly in April. I beg your pardon, in Japan next week. And we'll just have to see what Southeast Asia, how Southeast Asian countries respond when they see the document and see the announcement. And then we'll have to see what permutations occur. Because when something is fixed, you either have to take it or leave it. And that's what would happen with TPP. The one saving grace here might be, and again, I don't want to be Pollyannish, but I look for always an optimism. Maybe this story is not written and there's an opportunity to shape it. And so there could be some opportunity to shape it, as I said, in terms of bureaucratic alignments, in terms of the different components. We'll see.
On that optimistic note, I think we are going to be ending right now. I apologize for some of the issues that we've had with regard to our live feed. That said, I think this was a terrific discussion, and I think it was terrific because of our panelists. And I just want to thank you very much for setting time aside and coming across. And thank you to Denis and to Professor Lovely too. I'm sorry for the technical issues, but thank you very much again, once again, and to you, Satu, and to you, Craig.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
You're welcome. Take care.